Well, hello, everyone. This is Office Hours with Michael Quinn, your host. I'm talking this way because Olivia Perez-Breland told me it sounds so much better this way. And for probably a few years, I had my microphone backwards. But thanks for joining us, everybody. I can't actually talk like that the whole session. I'm really excited to have you here. I love this 30-minute block of kind of like a mini masterclass every week on all things transition, networking, LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by our partners at GBC Food Services. Really excited about them and the opportunities they provide our community. GBC Food Services provides all of those kiosks in grocery stores, large grocery stores all over the country. And you may say, what do you mean by kiosk? And what I mean is whenever you go into these large big box grocery stores, you'll see like a sushi stand, you'll see a Boar's Head deli counter, you'll see like cut produce, cut fruits, things like that. And you think that they're run by the grocery store when the reality is that those are franchises that are owned by these larger companies. And so with these franchises, that provides opportunity. And so with GBC Food Services, they have the three types I talked about all over the countries. They provide great service. They're loving veterans. They want more veterans to come in, and they have either franchise opportunities all over the country. And they also have some skill bridge and job opportunities like regional training managers, HR type roles, and everything else. And so I encourage you all to check out GBC Food Services on the Hire Military page. Just go to hiremilitary.us and follow the instructions, either SkillBridge or direct hire. And if all else fails, reach out to my friend Lucy Robinson with your questions. So I know she's going to love that. But let's talk about what office hours is supposed to be. So office hours is supposed to be my opportunity to engage with you and kind of give you my thoughts on the military transition topics of the week, the themes that have come to me through my regular engagement with people at all levels of the military transition. And so today, I kind of want to do a once around the world of what makes the transition so hard, right? And I know, like, if you haven't started yet, you're like, it can't be that hard. Like, I've excelled throughout my military career. And I'm going to say, full stop. It's hard for everyone unless you put in the work. So what makes it hard? Well, you start your transition, you go to your TAP courses, you know, the whole process of TAP, and they give you the basic skills, right? How to write a resume, how to prepare for an interview, how to negotiate salary, like all the basic things that you need at all levels of the transition, from like a one-term through retiring colonel, whatever. So what we instinctively do is that we look back at what we've done, right? All the amazing accomplishments. We capture those on a piece of paper, call it a resume, and then are very proud of it. And we want to highlight that to employers. And what we don't realize is that whole process is backwards, right? Well, let me break it down in ways that'll make sense. Let's say you need to have your house built and you interview contractors. And one of the contractors says, well, you know, you're like, what are your qualifications? Like, what kind of work have you done? Well, I lead the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries for the last 2 years. Are you going to hire them based off of that? Probably not, right? Unless they were leading the operations of 17,000 people building houses in 45 countries, then it might make sense, right? But that was what was all over my first resume. As the G3 Sergeant Major for Intelligence Security Command, I lead the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries with a $330 million annual budget. I was so proud of that. But we've just taken out the house building, right? Let's say you're going to go buy insurance and you're talking to different insurance providers and you're like, well, you know, what are your qualifications? And they're like, well, I mean, for the last 3 years, I've led the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries. Nope. Right? You're not answering the question. Let's say you need help with managing your finances or figuring out what to take out of your retirement check because they ask you on your final out, how much do you want to be taken out for taxes? You got to come prepared for that. So as you're talking to different financial advisors, right? Hey, what are your qualifications? Why should I choose you? I lead the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries. No, not unless it's 17,000 financial advisors in 45 countries. I hope you get where I'm going with this, because I could talk about going to someone to repair cars or to repair plumbing or whatever, or to lead a plumbing company. Well, I lead the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries. It doesn't make sense, right? We are only looking backwards. And so the main point of the transition is you have to look forwards and tailor everything in a way that makes sense to what you want to do, right? So let's talk about that now. That's the hardest step. And as I get into these steps, I do want to remind all of you that you can ask live questions. Olivia's behind the scenes. She'll grab them and pop them on the screen, and I'll answer them if they're relevant, right? I'll get to them. If she puts it on the screen, I'm going to answer that question. So I challenge you to ask her some good ones. And if you get a chance, let us know where you're dialing in from. But let's talk about the process, the transition process. The transition process starts with figuring out what you want to do and where you want to do it. You can't go in there saying, I'll go anywhere for the right opportunity. I'm just looking for an opportunity to be a leader. That's not a job. What you're looking for is a detailer to tell you where your job's going to be. And then you're never a best candidate because they don't know if you're going to like it. They don't know if you're going to be a good fit. They don't know how long you're going to stay, right? And so they're looking for hiring the best candidate. So you've got to think about this. And so what I will typically tell people in my Mastering LinkedIn webinars is draw 2 lines down a piece of paper. You got 3 columns and write location, write like salary, lifestyle, and write type of work down there and start writing down the things you want or don't want, right? The different locations you're open to, the different like types of salary or lifestyle considerations. Like you don't want to drive more than 30 minutes each way. You don't want to work 50 to 60 hours a week, or you do want to be hybrid, or you have to be remote. But just remember, remote requires a type of job. Remote is a work arrangement, not a job. And then the types of jobs that interest you. And the idea is you're trying to narrow down the millions of options that are out there, right? So you want to narrow that down to something that sounds interesting to you, right? And so let's say, you've got a location, you're open on the salary, you got to make a certain amount. So you'd be able to tell the type of role you want. And then you've got 2 or 3 types of jobs that interest you. Well, then you look in the area where you're going and make sure there's enough of those jobs there that you're competitive, right? If there's 1 or 2 jobs like that in the area, it's not going to work. I remember talking to people that wanted to go into aviation and were living in an area where there was no airports. And I'm like, how's that going to work out? Right. So you got to kind of narrow things down and get to a few jobs that interest you, at least for now, a few jobs that interest you. And then what you have to do is you have to start reaching out to people in that field. And this is where LinkedIn's most important. It's the biggest value is start reaching out to people in those fields and just ask for some advice. Most of the country, if you're like, hey, I'm a veteran or I'm a service member, I'm in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Space Force, I'm getting out in 6 months, I'm getting out in a year, I'm trying to figure out what's next. Do you just have a few minutes to give me some advice and tell me what you do so it can help me choose? If you do that to the large portion of the country, so many people are going to say yes. And then if you narrow that down to veterans, so many even more, like the percentage is going to be even more. During my transition, I did 200 of these phone calls in 1 year, 200. And I probably had like a 50% response rate. And I would just send out requests and then I'd schedule and do multiple calls a day. And really, the idea is, say you want to be the ubiquitous project manager, right? Best marketing scheme ever. You want to be a project manager, right? Well, what I would tell you to do is reach out to 5 project managers, right? That are veterans. They have a title project manager or they program manager. They've been in the field a little while. You reach out to them and say, hey, I've noticed you're an Army veteran, a Navy veteran, whatever. And then that you found success as a project manager. I'm an Army veteran or I'm an Army Sergeant Major. I'm getting out in 6 months. I'm trying to figure out what's next. Do you have a few minutes to just give me some advice? Or would love to join your network and maybe get some advice. Small asks, right? I'll get into that later. You could do that 10 times a day, legitimately, and it takes 5 minutes. 10 times a day, you send out requests. All over the country, you can do a search for a title, click people, add a location, go to all filters, add past company, U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Space Force, I think I said Marine Corps, but I don't want to leave anybody out. But you could do that and find a list of veterans in that area, in those roles, and just start reaching out. So you are unrestricted in many ways into how many of these you can do. Now, you want to find out if that is the job for you. This is the goal, right? And how good of a fit you are. And so what you want to do is you literally want to get into a conversation with them, right? You want them to do more talking than you. You're not reaching out to strangers and asking for a job. I'll get into that later as well. But you really want to ask questions about their day at work, right? What do you actually do as a project manager, right? What type of projects do you have? What are your focus points? What are the things that you really spend the most time on? What does your day work like? Do you go to an office site? Do you work in front of your computer? Are you meeting with clients? Are you doing any kind of sales or account management with potential new clients? What are the things that you track? What are your metrics that show that you're doing your job right, that you're successful, that your project's on time? What are your boss's priorities? If you ask this questions with the intent on truly understanding what they do, what their biggest challenges are, if you ask these questions to kind of get a good feel for what they do, and this is any field, and you ask it for 5, 7, 10 people, you'll know whether you want to do that job or not, right? You will not only just know whether you want to do it or not, you will see trends in the vocabulary they're using, the words they're using to describe things. You will have 5 to 10 people telling you what their biggest challenges are, right? Which is the answers to the test. You will know how they track metrics and what metrics are important to them. So that the intent of all this is that you can go back into your background, and instead of saying, I lead the operations for 17,000 people, 45 countries with an annual budget of $330, you can say that you're a project manager that led these types of projects, and then start to highlight specific examples, right? In using words that make sense to them, using numbers that make sense to them, talking about under time, under budget, or problems you've solved. You have all the metrics that you need, right? That's the key to all of this. And so when you talk about my background, and this is why I think a lot of senior leaders or people that have been in multiple terms have a hard time with this, is, I caught myself in job boards early in the transition looking for ranks. I caught myself looking for searching for director in a job board. I caught myself searching for a vice president, senior manager, right? And I would click and click and click, and I'd go through this rabbit hole of different opportunities, right? And every one of them I'd say, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. But the reality is, the resume I had didn't say that. It didn't speak to those jobs. And no matter how much you read a job description and use some of these tools to bring the keywords in, you're not addressing the things that are most important to them in a way that makes sense. You're not showing them you are the best project manager, the best HR guy, the best Intel professional, the best whatever, right? But when I look at my career and when I started, and so I realized I wasn't doing that right, that I was trying to translate rank, and I just wanted to be in charge, right? I wanted to build a team that, took care of people, positively impacted the organization. I'm willing to go anywhere for the right opportunity. No, that's not good. I wasn't willing to go anywhere. People started dropping locations to me, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go there. And they started saying different roles. I'm like, not really. I don't really willing to do anything. And so I had to narrow it down. But when you think about the things as, a sergeant major that had been in 24 years in the Intel field, when you think about the different types of jobs that I could have been eligible for, you could look at any of the military intelligence, Intel community type jobs. Like I definitely could have went back and worked in there in the government or some of these big contractors. Project or program management roles typically would have been more like either Intel projects or training or security or, like stuff, leader development, like not even leader development, like those types of projects. Like you wouldn't have hired me to be a hospital, project, sort of running a project in a hospital, or you wouldn't have had me running a cyber project or anything like that. So, but there were project or program management roles. I could have went into HR. A lot of the things I found that I'd focused on were HR relevant, but I had some gaps. I could have went into operations. That's what I was doing for the last few years. I could have went into consulting in different verticals. I could have went into security. I was the J2 for the White House Communication Agency. I had a whole career of doing threat vulnerability assessments. I ran physical security. I was a security manager. I am right now, a facility security officer. So like I could have done all those things, but I couldn't do all of those things at once. There was no job that was all of those things. And so what I needed to do was narrow that down. And if that was a question, pull it back up, please. I had to narrow it down. I couldn't just build a resume and say I wanted to do all those things. And if I tried to focus on making myself a best candidate for all of those, I would have been a mile wide and an inch deep, and then you're not a best candidate, right? You want to hire someone that is an expert or is going to rock it for what you want to do. And so that's where I talk about you really have to dial in. You have to, people say, I don't want to paint myself in a box. And I'm like, you have to. You want to be a best candidate, you have to choose. And the beauty of it is you can change, you can pivot, right? But I will hire the plumber over the person who says they want to do plumbing, but can't give me any concrete experience or licenses or anything to prove that they've been a plumber. I'll hire the plumber every time, right? And so that's the same thing for everything we talk about. A lot of people say they want to go into military recruiting. They want to build. They realize that the transition is so difficult, so they want to help companies hire veterans. And unfortunately, many of them don't know how companies work. They don't even understand that the log jams in companies that they have to fix. They just think they know the military and they want to do it. So, you have to really narrow it down. And then, I see that, or they say you're overqualified with multiple fields. I mean, look, I went to a job fair and one of the executives that was there, the job fair was co-located where the Army Navy game was that year. So a lot of executives came in. One of the executives came in and said, "Oh my God, this is a $200,000 a year resume." And I'm like, "Fantastic. Let's get going." And he's like, "I don't know what I do with you." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, like these are big numbers, big accomplishments, a lot of leadership, everything else like that. I don't know where you fit in my organization." Like, he's like, "Maybe like we have a check processing facility." It was a large bank. He's like, "We have a check processing facility in this city over here. Like, could you run that?" And I'm like, "I can run anything." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't." So, the overqualified means, in so many ways, it means you're not communicating it in a way that makes sense to them.
And the big fear about hiring someone that's overqualified is that they are going to get bored, right? It's hard to believe that someone's going to work below their level and stay there for 2 to 3 years to make it a quality hire. And so you've got to do it. And this goes in. Let's talk about overqualified. If a job requires a bachelor's degree and you say you're pursuing an MBA, does that make you overqualified? No, but there may be the consideration that, hey, if they're going to get their MBA in 2 years, okay, great. But if they're going to get their MBA, in September, they're probably going to want a bump, or they're probably going to be looking for a job that requires an MBA. So there's always that, like, are they going to be overqualified piece, right? I see people, a lot of people want to post that they've gotten a PhD, and I've got mad respect for people that continue education, but, it's got to be relevant to the job you want to do, right? And there are some cases where saying you are Dr. So-and-so may turn people off, unless I'm going into a medical facility, right? Or I'm going into your office, like, then I'll call you doctor all day. I usually just call you sir or ma'am, but you get where I'm going with this. And so the key to this whole thing is speaking to the person in ways that they understand, in ways that solve their problem, right? They're hiring an HR professional. It says they want to focus on benefits and compensation and onboarding, right? That's because they have a problem. Like, they need someone to fix that or to run it for their organization. You have to come in and tell them how you are going to solve that, right? And that goes into my semi-rant about sales. People are really uncomfortable with the word sales. And I have to explain that the world runs on sales, right? And that if you can't sell yourself as a best candidate to solve their problems, like the proponent of sales is you understand the potential client and their problems, and you fix them for it, it's easy, right? If you don't know the client and their problem, then you can't fix it for them. You're not going to be good at sales, right? So this is the key, right? There's no easy way. There's no survey you can take. There's no tests you can take that's going to tell you, hey, you should go pursue a job in this, right? You have to make an educated decision. But I guarantee you, once you've spoken to 5, 7, 10 people in similar fields, you're going to know whether you want to do it. And if you want to do it and they tell you have the experience with their help, you will be a best candidate. And they're probably going to be making referrals and opening you up to their network. So just keep that in mind. Like, that is the challenge, right? Once you know what people are looking for, the resume's easy, the interview's easy, the salary negotiation's easy, because you know what people are telling you should be asking for, right? You've got the answers to the test. You still got to practice, but if you know what they're looking for and you truly understand that field, you will be a best candidate. So that's the overview of the transition itself. So let's talk about 2 other quick topics before I wrap it up. One is relationships, right? How do you build relationships with people on social media, with strangers? And I'll tell you, and it has to, in so many ways, they start by being non-transactional, which means you start to build relationships before you need them, right? It's about, think about you have a bank account, a social media bank account, right? Or a relationship bank account. Every time you invest, right? Invest in sharing on the platform, invest in helping someone, invest in commenting on their content, invest, right? Into this social media relationship building bank account. Go to networking events, help somebody out, whatever. They're all investments. Well, the idea is you invest in these phone calls, the outreach, everything else like that. You create social capital, right? You've got a bank account that keeps growing, right? The idea is you need to build that bank account, that's build up social capital before you need to make a withdrawal, right? And the problem is, unfortunately, people get on late and they just need a job. And so they start wanting to make a withdrawal on their bank account, and they don't have any money, or they don't have enough money, right? And that's where it gets hard. And I will tell you that in this, along with this like concept, I keep making this box today. That's my thing. But the bank account concept, this social capital concept, I will say that unlike other sectors of the country, being a veteran or a transitioning service member, it's like when you sign up for a bank account and you get X amount of dollars. Like you get capital automatically for being a veteran, a service member, or whatever. So you start off a little higher, you can reach out. And then if you reach out to other veterans, they won't charge you. It's like getting your military discount. Like they don't charge you as much. I hope that makes sense to all of you. But the idea is, you have to consistently share, invest, engage, build relationships before you ask for anything. And asking for something on behalf of somebody else isn't a withdrawal. In a lot of ways, that is doing somebody else a favor. So just keep these things in mind and really think about that. How are you investing into your community, right? How are you having these phone calls? How are you supporting others and not asking for anything in return, so that you're building social capital? And then when you need something, they're there for you. One of my buddies, I shared this last week, he got laid off. It wasn't due to anything he'd done. The very large company he worked for went, this business unit doesn't make sense for the future. We're getting rid of it. And he got a 6-month severance package. And so he started engaging his network, and he started the next company within 2 months, and he had 4 months of double dipping. And so it was wonderful. And that's about as fast as I've seen it happen when you get out, because you've got to apply, interview, they usually have to get a start date and everything else like that. But the only reason that happened is that he never stopped networking. He never stopped engaging. He never stopped staying in touch with his community. And so when he needed to make a withdrawal, they were there for him. And so I just want you to keep that in mind. And so when we talk about how to start small, what I'll usually say is, first outreach, highlight what you have in common with the person. Look at their profile, make it specific if you can, show them that you looked at their profile, highlight what you've had in common, say something semi-flattering, not over the top flattering, but say something semi-flattering, and then make an initial small ask. And the small ask could be joining their professional network. If I'm sending the request, I like to ask to join their network. It's kind of petty, but it really annoys me when someone says, hey, I'd like to add you to my network. I'm like, wait a minute, you're asking me and you just want to add me to your network? That sounds so impersonal. Sounds like you've said that a lot of times to people instead of being like, so I'll ask them to join their professional network. And then whatever the ask is, make it really small. Like, hey, I'd love to connect and maybe get some advice. Or do you have, a few minutes in the next couple of weeks to kind of hop on a call and just give me some advice, talk to me about what you do. And that's the initial ask, right? And the same thing, you could ask them a question, a specific question. And here's the deal. If they're not going to accept your connection request, if they're not going to answer your question, if they're not going to be willing to hop on a call for a few minutes, they're not going to read your life story and review your resume and put you in for a job. And so what I say is, you got to start small, right? Let's connect. And if they accept your connection request, thank them for it and ask them a question. And if they answer the question, ready for this? Thank them for it and ask for some advice. Like, what can I do to make myself more marketable, or for a phone call? And if they give you advice, ready for this? Thank them for it and do the advice. Then come back to them and say, hey, you recommended I do this. I did it. Here's the results. Do you have some time to connect and maybe give me some more advice? That's an instant phone call, right? But so many people drop off at the work point. So I just, you've got to start early. You've got to start small. You've got to be working this from a personal level and building relationships and treat it like it's real life. And so we've got a question from Bobby George. It says, Mike, in your experience, what is the best timeline for starting to build those relationships? I mean, yesterday. You know, you can build them one by one overnight, right? You find out to someone, you keep asking, you get to a phone call, you have enough in common, then and the relationship can form pretty quickly. But if you're going to do it at scale, I mean, a year to 2 years out minimum. I mean, you should be doing it now for 5 years from now. I show up at client meetings and people know me. It's a lot easier. I show up to look for opportunities or to talk about opportunities, some of the biggest consulting firms in the world. And they're like, Mike, so excited to finally meet you. We want to get you in a team because I've taken the time to build those relationships. I will share one of the most impactful relationships, though, happened almost overnight. And you can't predict them, was with Dan Savage. He was 3 head of veteran programs at LinkedIn ago. It was Corey, Sarah, Dan. And so Dan, I sent him an article I wrote about, what in the world is a sergeant major that I wrote. And I said, what are your thoughts on this? And I sent him that article. I'd already been connected to him. And he was like, I love it. Let's hop on a call. And we got on the call and we connected. And then I had an opportunity where I engaged with the TRADOC Command Sergeant Major. And I said, hey, Dan, the TRADOC Command Sergeant Major wants to do something. Why don't you come out and do an engagement out here? I'll get the theater together or whatever. And he came out. I made a couple connections, and helped him in some ways. And then he invited me to events and phone calls and talked about things and put me in for a referral there. I mean, and it was a life-changing relationship that started with a connection, me consistently engaging, and then sending him something and asking an easy question. So that's you have to start before you do it. And ideally, the more successful you'll be will be because you don't need something. Unfortunately, no matter how much you try to make it non-transactional, if the stress of needing a job, like right now, is there, it's going to bleed through in the conversation. It's going to be really hard for you to really connect because the underlining intent is, or the underlying goal is, you need to get something out of that person. And you're going to go to the next one and the next one, and it makes it so much harder. So you've got to start before you need it. And if by chance you do, you just got to start with the intent of down the road, right? And keep maintaining it. So I was going to get into content, but this is my favorite topic to talk about. And I ran out of time. So hopefully you found value in this. Hopefully, this helps you kind of shape your way going forward. It helps you identify some tools you can use to kind of chart your path and make yourself a best candidate. I will tell you that, so many in our community are amazing, bring so many diverse talents and skill sets and experiences, and that baseline of leadership that we have that is higher than the general baseline or the floor of the people out there. There's so much opportunity out there for our community. And I just want people to put in the work to find the relationships they need, to build the relationships they need to make themselves a best candidate. And I know if you start doing it here, you'll get there. So again, thanks to our sponsors for today, GBC Food Services, our Alliance Program partnerships. If you're interested in being a sponsor or working with us, you can always reach out to me here on LinkedIn, or you can send a note to us through the Contact Us page on the Hire Military website. We'll get to you, and have a great day, everyone.